Hi, I'm Chuck Morendi, an exclusive buyer's agent in the Sequim, Washington area, formerly a real estate attorney. I show a lot of Sequim homes, and over the decades I've shown a lot of homes to my buyer clients from all over the country. That means I interact with a lot of listing brokers because I'm scheduling showings, discussing features, getting questions answered, emailing and texting with them, and working with those brokers when I submit offers on their listings. Recently, I almost submitted an offer on a listing for one of my buyers from California. And by the way, this is a true story. And there's a lesson in here for sellers who have no idea how their own listing agent can make a mess of things. To keep things diplomatic, I won't mention where this home is located or who the listing broker is. What is important is the critical nature of a buyer doing their due diligence even before making an offer. The home is a custom 2-story home close to a beach and probably doesn't sit more than 10 feet above sea level. There are a number of homes along the beach there, and in the rainy season, there's quite a bit of water that drains down the steep hillside behind the homes into the bay. Not unusual. I have a degree in economics, and one of the famous Latin phrases in economics is caveat emptor, which means buyer beware. Now, many listing brokers still believe, apparently, in caveat emptor. Of course, they would never admit this because of the strict consumer protection laws we have now, but I'm telling you, as a buyer's agent, for many years, there's no question the rule for many listing brokers is buyer beware. Not all listing agents, but the vast majority will not reveal critical information about a listing to the buyer or the buyer's broker, even when they know it. Now, my buyer and I enjoyed looking at this gorgeous home. The sun was out. It was about 75 degrees, a perfect temperature in the summer in the Northwest. If there ever was a home and location that tempted a buyer to make an offer quickly, this was it. I've been doing this too long to send my clients running down a path to the precipice of the Grand Canyon without thinking it through and doing some fundamental due diligence. More detailed due diligence comes with the contingencies that we include with a written offer, but a few preliminary questions to the listing agent and some internet digging in the real estate records is really essential. I do that all the time. The last thing I want to do, and I've never done it in 40 years, is let my clients waltz into a potential nightmare scenario they don't need in their retirement years. As my clients and I stood there looking at the bay barely 300 feet away at high tide and perhaps only 10 feet above sea level, and as we noticed what is apparently a drainage creek running down the steep slope behind the home to the bay, we looked at each other and said, does this property ever flood? Or is at risk for flooding from storms? Or could the water come over the top of that low dike on the beach at high tide in a storm? Or is there a legitimate tsunami threat right here on the beach? All reasonable questions, right? The answers you get in life are only as good as the questions you ask. The greatest danger is not the questions you ask, but the questions you don't ask. That was something I learned and articulated back when I was practicing law. As we were about to leave after spending about an hour on site, a couple walking past the house stopped to chat with my buyer for a few minutes. They enjoyed a friendly conversation, and the neighbor told my buyer that he was a retired engineer who designed a water drainage system with pumps that he operated, because about 5 years earlier, the street flooded where we were standing. He said the street no longer flooded because of the drainage system in place. We had no reason to question the man's integrity. He was very pleasant and quite knowledgeable on this matter. He said something that only an engineer would say. When I see a problem, I ask, how can we engineer around the problem? Or words to that effect, a typical thing an engineer might say, right? So he shared that if the pumps were not operating when it was pouring rain, the street would flood again. So here was a professional engineer, retired and out for a stroll with his wife, who lived in that neighborhood and was good enough to help his neighbors by volunteering his expertise and time to prevent flooding. He had no apparent reason to lie to us, and he came off as transparent and credible to me. My clients and I debriefed, and my clients asked me to contact the listing agent to find out more about the history of flooding and also to find out how much the seller's flood insurance premium is. Meanwhile, I reviewed the Form 17 seller disclosure statement, which acknowledged that a few years back the garage had flooded. The reason given was that a drainage screen was plugged up. Now, where did the water come from? Apparently from the hillside above the house during hard rain, when a lot of water is draining down the hill and across the property. When I heard back from the listing broker, she had a terse response. The sellers do not have flood insurance. The house was never flooded, nor has the water from the inlet ever come close to the house. And that was it. That was her answer. No explanation, no information about why they didn't have flood insurance in a high-risk zone like this, and no reassurance with any historical information or other documentation. Well, I texted back, "Thanks. My buyers are uncomfortable with the lack of information in what is obviously an area that can and does flood. The engineer neighbor told us the streets flood, and he operates the pumps. The seller admitted in the Form 17 the garage flooded. The house is barely above sea level, and they had to build a big dike on the beach to keep the water out. And let's not forget about the threat of tsunamis. Maybe the sellers don't have flood insurance because it's very expensive." This lack of information will scare away discerning, intelligent buyers like mine. I do wish you all the best. End quote. That's how I ended my text to the listing agent. And the listing broker texted back, quote, "Well, your information is incorrect. The engineer neighbor is new," which is apparently her way or her attempt to politely call the engineer a liar. And she continued, "And the disclosure was about the rainfall that fell in June of this year that made headlines. We got over an inch in a half hour. It was in the driveway, not the streets, and not the house. But if they have concerns about the sea level, of course, don't buy the house. But do not tell me that my clients or myself are not saying the truth. And of course, best to you," end quote. This is from the listing agent. And for clarification purposes only, not to be defensive, I texted back, quote, "I didn't say anything about you not telling the truth." So anyway, having been an attorney for 20 years, I recognize the technical nature of her response that, that the house has never flooded, nor has the water from the inlet ever come close to the house. Neither my buyer nor I suggested any or even thought that the house had actually flooded inside, nor did we even suggest that the water from the inlet had ever come to the front porch. Those were not our questions. In my legal career, I learned to discern when someone is playing coy and not directly answering a question, so as not to get caught and not to be liable in a lawsuit for fraud or misrepresentation. It's subtle, but they often change the subject slightly while making it appear they are addressing your concerns. Exaggeration and deception are just other ways to lie. How a person answers a question can also be self-incriminating, too. Not to make light of this scenario, but I imagined a police detective asking a simple question to a person on a street corner in Los Angeles. "How long have you been on this corner?" And the individual responds with something like, "Officer, I have no idea who stole the $327.42 at the Circle K on the next block 57 minutes ago." Well, my buyer had told me they wanted to make an offer once we were able to dismiss any big concerns about the risks of flooding. But after the listing broker's lackadaisical dismissal of our concerns, both my buyer and I felt she was essentially saying, "Walk on by, folks. There's nothing to see here." I used to live in Las Vegas when I was a JAG in the Air Force, and I'm familiar with the sleight of hand of the magicians. The problem with this listing agent's approach was that my buyers were not stupid or naive. They cannot be lulled into making an offer like a mouse nibbling at the peanut butter on the trigger of a trap. Buyers are smart these days, and they know how to do their research. At least my clients are. The home did later sell to someone, and who knows if they had a buyer's agent who protected them? I dare say probably not. Who would pay top dollar for a home under those circumstances? What did my buyer say? We're not comfortable with the lack of information regarding the risk of flooding, so we're backing off on making an offer on this one. Is there any question the listing agent botched this one terribly? No, there's no question at all. The sad thing is her seller client had no idea how she had made a mess of this. And is this how she treats all potential buyers? Now, let me share how I would handle this kind of listed property if I were the listing broker. There's room for difference of opinion here, but I think honesty and full disclosure should govern professional behavior on this matter and in all matters. Knowing that flooding from both directions above and below this home would be a serious concern for any discerning and intelligent buyer, I would put together information and I'd give prospective buyers that package so they could alleviate their concerns. So that information might turn out to be a little package of reports from the state agencies or even from neighbors who had their own studies done when they purchased their homes. And maybe some insurance information that the HOA or one of the neighbors had, or that the listing broker or the seller got directly from a local insurance agent. A flood insurance premium quote would help a lot to put risk and cost in perspective. I would put together all the information I could find and include a cover letter which did not hide the ball, but openly shared the risks and that were there, and by documentation, help the buyer make a decision, a reasonably intelligent decision, based on the experience in the neighborhood and all that could be gathered about floods and the risks of floods. Let's face it, honesty is always the best approach. It certainly is for anyone who wants to avoid a lawsuit someday. There's a reason attorneys are so busy, right? The last issue I want to emphasize here is that a buyer has the responsibility to protect themselves. Well, that means, first and foremost, doing serious research to find a buyer's agent who actually has the knowledge and experience to give you the guidance you need, as well as watch your backside. I realize that may sound like I'm tooting my own horn here, but seriously, do you want to hire G.I. Jane to represent you in purchasing a home with your hard-earned money that took a lifetime to save? If you're a buyer shopping for a home, remember this rule: the answers you get in life are only as good as the questions you ask. The greatest danger is not the questions you ask, but the questions you don't ask. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.